Hello, fellow GH fans, and welcome to the Port Charles podcast. I am Eric, your host for this show. And in this debut episode, I'm going to kind of break down my history with the show, how I came to be a fan, because I know you're thinking, wait a minute, this is a podcast about a soap opera, and it's being hosted by a guy? What? That doesn't make sense. Yes, guys can like soap operas. It's okay. I mean, after all, what's the difference between, say, General Hospital and Yellowstone or Breaking Bad or any number of shows out there? Just one's in the daytime, others are in the nighttime. Other than that, not a whole lot of real differences, right? So, anyway, like many of you, I was probably introduced to GH as a kid. Your parents watched GH, maybe your mother's, mine did as well. I remember as a kid coming home from school and my mother would have it on TV. Now, I never really like sat down and watched it per se, but you kind of, I guess just by osmosis, you pick up things that you hear in the background, you kind of see on TV once in a while. So I was kind of introduced in a very basic way as a young kid, and I kind of vaguely became familiar with the Quartermains and the Spencers, Luke, Laura, Lucky, the Scorpios, Robert Scorpio, Anna Devane, Holly Sutton, that whole thing. So I kind of was introduced in a way, and as years go by, I don't know why those names would have kind of stuck with me. But anyway, so fast forward several years, and it's 1998. And in fact, it's February of 1998, and I'll get to why I remember that so very well. So I was a freshman in college at the time. I'd come home from class one afternoon. I turned on TV, scrolling through the channels, and I see that General Hospital's on. I'm like, wait, this show's still on after all these years? Okay. So I tried to find something to watch, couldn't really find anything that interested me. So I said, you know what? Let me turn on General Hospital. Let me see if there's anybody after all these years that I even remotely remember. A long shot, right? Total long shot. So I turned it on, and there was still, the Quartermains were still there. Luke Spencer, Laura Spencer, Lucky Spencer. Now you had Lulu Spencer. And you had Max Scorpio now, which I really didn't remember. I remembered Robert, but he wasn't on the show at the time. Then you had Robin Scorpio, and I was like, okay, I kind of remember her a little bit. But that was really it. But then you had all these other new characters, these Cassadines and different characters like that. Well, anyway, the episode that I watched, it was a Friday episode in February of 1998. And again, there's a reason why I remember this so vividly. And for any of you who were watching back then in, the late 90s or whatever, and I'm sure this was this way for quite a while, but I remember back in the day, General Hospital on Fridays would usually always end in a cliffhanger episode. Like, you had to tune in Monday to find out what happened at the end of Friday. And I love that way of writing. Like, I wish General Hospital would bring that back. I think it would really kind of help the viewing audience, because so much can happen from a Friday to a Monday that if you don't give them something to come back for on Monday, then that gives them 72 hours to figure out something else to occupy their attention. And in this day and age, there is so much that can occupy our attention that you have to give them something to come back to. Primetime television does a great job of this because they are only on one night a week for about 13 weeks or so. So they have to give us something to come back the next week, because as much as a lot can happen in 72 hours, a lot can happen in a week. So unless you're hooked into that show, you're probably going to, there's a good chance you might find something else to do. So anyway, General Hospital would have cliffhangers on Friday afternoon, and this one would be no different. It was Friday, February 13th, 1998. And the reason I remember that date so vividly is because when I tuned in, it was probably about 2:30, 2:45 local time. I live in Texas, and so in Central Time, it was probably around 2:30 to 2:45, somewhere around there when I turned it on. And I saw this young girl on there by the name of Elizabeth Weber, and I was immediately just struck. Like, you gotta remember, I'm an 18-year-old guy and full of testosterone and hormones, and I'm all about girls and everything else. So I see Elizabeth Weber, and I'm like, oh my God, this girl is gorgeous. Like, this girl's a knockout. I am like completely and utterly smitten at first sight with this girl. Well, it just so happens that this was a Valentine's episode because there was something with the Valentine's dance, and I guess she said she was going with somebody and she didn't, and I don't know, though. I don't really remember the storyline per se, but I remember at the very end of this Friday episode, it was the one where Elizabeth Weber goes to the park. She's sitting on the bench, and at the very end of the episode, somebody comes out from the bushes, grabs Elizabeth, and pulls her into the bushes. And I'm just like, oh my God, what just happened? What in the world? Okay, I'm tuning in Monday. I've got to see what happened to this girl, okay? So I tuned in Monday, and that was the beginning of the end. They had me from that moment forward. That was the beginning of the storyline where Elizabeth got raped, and it started the Lucky and Elizabeth storyline. And I was like completely all in. I was with it. Because not only did I realize, like, oh my God, Rebecca Hurst, the actress, is just amazingly beautiful. Beautiful. And still to this day, I mean, I feel like this woman never ages. Like, she is just timelessly beautiful. She was also such a great actress because she had to play someone who was completely shattered and vulnerable and just at their lowest possible point. And I mean, she nailed it. I bought in. I bought in to what she was selling. So that got me into the show. It would be somebody else that would make me stay for the long term, that would go along with it, because you can't just go, like, one character probably isn't going to get you hooked into a show, unless maybe that character is the star of the show. But I think you could argue that there is no one real star when it comes to General Hospital or really any kind of like daytime soap opera or show like that. Whereas, like, in a Yellowstone, Kevin Costner is a star. And the Sopranos back in the day, Tony Soprano was the star. That was the star character of the Sopranos. In General Hospital, the important storylines kind of shift, and every character and every actor kind of gets their own time to shine, which you have to do if you're writing daily television that goes all year long. So while the character of Elizabeth got my attention, her storyline and her beginning romance with Lucky Spencer got me to stay. It was actually the character of Jason Morgan that got me hooked, and just like that was it for me. Because here was this guy, and I knew nothing about him being a Quartermain. Okay, I did not watch during that time. I knew nothing about him being a Quartermain other than what I gathered from my context clues of watching the show in February and onward of 1998. So I knew he was a Quartermain only because they said he used to be a Quartermain, basically. But here you have this guy who's in charge of the Port Charles mob. He's stoic, he's stone cold, and I just dug that character. Here was a guy who was quiet and powerful, and he just had this aura about him. But at the same time, he would go home and he's taking care of this baby that he has with Carly, who at the time was played by Sarah Brown. And to this day, I will argue and I will forever argue that Sarah Brown is one of the most criminally underrated actresses of all time. Daytime, primetime, TV, movies, you name it. Sarah Brown is a phenomenal actress. And her portrayal of Carly, I'm sorry, hands down, will always be my favorite. Always be my favorite portrayal. I love Laura Wright. I love what she's done. I love Tamara Brown. I love what they did with the character, but Sarah was always my favorite. Always my favorite from day one. So their dynamic was really good because Carly was a train wreck and Jason would always have to clean up her messes. So it was just kind of these ongoing dynamics, and then you had the Spencers versus the Cassadines. And I really kind of got into, okay, so Lucky Spencer and Nicholas Cassadine are brothers, but the two families hate each other, but yet these two kind of hated each other, but now they're kind of bonding and getting along, and it's weird, and it's like, okay, and then now you have these Quartermains, but now you have an AJ Quartermain, you have an Emily Quartermain, and there's just all these different dynamics, and Edward Quartermain, which was an amazing character, just, I love the character of Edward Quartermain. So it was all these different dynamics that really got me to stay over the years. So anyway, so fast forward, this was 1998. This got me through to the end of the 90s. And it was probably around 2000, maybe 2001, because you have to remember, at this time, the internet was still not what it is today. There was no social media in 2000 or 2001. We still hadn't even gotten to MySpace yet, let alone a Facebook and a Twitter and an Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and all these other ones. There was no social media. The internet was still pretty much in its infancy. I mean, this was back in the time when, and if you're a younger viewer of this show, you're going to find this crazy. If you're an older viewer of the show like I am, you're going to remember this vividly. But we were at a time in the year 2000 where our parents at the time, and a lot of us were going, you know what? I'm never putting my credit card into a computer. I'm not buying anything online. Why am I going to put my credit card information on a computer for anybody to have? I'm never doing that. Now look at us. Everything is paid online. Everything is digital. Everything is automatic debited. You got Amazons and the eBays and the PayPals. It is rare for you to see a dollar bill anymore, okay? Because everything is done online. But that was the mentality back then. It was also the mentality that the entire internet was just a fad that was eventually going to go away. And that's hard to believe in 2022 that the internet is just a fad that's going to go away and then we'll get back to real life where we do real life interactions with each other. Those days are long gone and they're never coming back. I can assure you the internet is no longer a fad, okay? So in 2000, there was no Facebook. So there was no Facebook groups to engage with other General Hospital fans. There was no Twitter. There was no Instagram. There was none of that. So at that time, you had message boards. Message boards were everything. And it's not like it is today where it's Reddit and you got 500 million Reddit topics and subtopics and everything else. This was like bare bones minimum infancy of message boards. But you were able to create such a dynamic community with those message boards. I found a site that I believe it was called Soap Zone or something along those lines. But it covered all the ABC soap operas that were on at the time. You had All My Children, One Life to Live at General Hospital. So I became a member of the site and I got onto the message boards and surprisingly was very welcome with open arms from day one. Because at the time, it was very rare to find a guy that liked a soap opera. And to publicly come out and say, hey, yeah, I'm a guy, I watch soap operas. Okay, so what? Back then it was rare, but I was so welcomed on these message boards and these groups that I love being part of the community. I love the camaraderie. I love seeing the same names over and over again and all of us engaging on a daily basis. As soon as the show would end, we'd get on the computer, we'd talk about what just happened. For the longest time, I actually would come home, or if I was already home, I would watch the show and I would actually write out segment by segment everything that happened in every scene. And as soon as I was done, post it to the message boards so that if you happen to miss the show, you could come onto the message board and see segment for segment everything that happened on that day's show. Because again, at the time, 2000, there is no DVR, there is no on demand. If you didn't tape it, and by this point, VHS was even really kind of going away. A lot of it was DVD, and it was you really couldn't record television shows on DVD. So if you missed it, you missed it back then. So I provided that as a service, and the people on the message boards loved it. They loved the daily segment by segment recap of what I did. And I loved doing that for everybody. And it also got to a point where I got such a following that every year at the end of the year, I would create my own GH awards, kind of like an Emmys or an Oscars or whatever. And it was really just kind of an online thing. I mean, nobody actually received an actual award, but I would come up with categories that just weren't traditional, like best actor, best actress. Mine would have been like villain of the year. Who was the best villain? Which character was the best newcomer this year? Which new character was the best one? Who was the best couple or duo of the year? It actually started out as best couple, but then some people, after feedback, were going, well, I don't know, I kind of dig Sonny and Jason. So it's kind of like, okay, well, they're not really a couple, so I guess we'll go couple / duo of the year. And then I would do like best female character, best male character. And it'd always be the characters. It would never be the actors or actresses that portrayed these parts. I kept everything within the context of the show. And I think that people really responded and liked that because we weren't criticizing any actor or actress. You can criticize a character all day long. That's fine to criticize a character, but I will never criticize an actor because let's face it, they're doing it, I'm not. They're getting paid, I'm not. So I can't criticize anybody that's making a living doing acting. Okay, I can't. If you could do it, you could do it. That's why I actually love like when Stephen A. Smith comes on from who plays Brick, Sonny's basically new right hand man, kind of. I'm not a big fan of Stephen A. Smith when it comes to the sports world, even though I'm a huge sports fan. I'm not a big fan of Stephen A. Smith in that context. But I love his character on General Hospital. And if he was on every day, I'd love it. I'd love it if he was on more because I think he plays that part very well. And props to Stephen A. Smith for crossing over and being able to do that. So I was part of the community. Now, as time would go on, I would get older. Life happens. You kind of get away from things. This whole internet thing evolves. And these message boards really kind of go away. They lose their luster. You have the MySpace. You have Facebook. Twitter starts around 2004. It really wouldn't get going for another several years. But you would have Facebook groups and things like that. So I just kind of fell out of the whole community. Over the years, I would try to stay current with the show. I would go periods of times where I just wouldn't watch. Life was happening, didn't have time, and just didn't make time. Sometimes I would kind of read and try to catch up. So now in 2022, here I am. And not only am I back to watching the show, here I am sitting here recording a podcast for it. Because I just don't think there is that many podcasts out there for General Hospital, but there's still a huge fan base. I mean, we still have General Hospital conventions and meet and greets and signings and all these different things. And this show has really lasted the test of time on television. And here I am now wanting to recreate a community. And when I say that, I'm not being presumptuous and I'm not being arrogant and thinking that there's no community out there and I'm going to build a new community. The community's already there. Okay, don't get me wrong. The community's already there. I want to build this community, if you will, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. Again, I'm not trying to come off sounding like I'm this great person and I'm going to make, I'm going to move mountains or anything. It's nothing like that. I want to build this community, this podcast community, this community of General Hospital fans around this podcast, around social media, around a website, around the whole thing. And I want to invite each and every one of you to be a part of it. Okay? This is not about me. This is about us. And that's how it's always going to be. Okay? I welcome your feedback. If my show just absolutely sucks, then it sucks, and I apologize, and I'll get better, and I'll take your feedback, even if it's just like, hey, you suck, you should quit, okay, I'll think about it for 5 seconds, and then I probably won't, but, so that's what I'm here for. I'm here for community. Now you know my backstory. Going forward, I'm going to try to do quick little recaps, hopefully daily. And those episodes aren't going to be very long because in the course of an hour, there's just not that much that happens. And, a lot of people will do like weekly recaps, but I'll come on, I'll do a quick, even if it's a 5-minute little, just here's my take on what I saw today. Here's kind of some random thoughts after watching today's episode. And again, if it's 5 minutes, if it's 5 minutes, if it's 30 minutes, it's 30 minutes. I'm also going to come on, I'll cover some rumors, I'll cover some spoilers, and I will let every one of you know if I'm giving a spoiler, I'll let you know ahead of time so that you're not accidentally stumbling into something you may not want to see or hear. So anyways, thank you so much for listening to this. I hope that you will buy into what I'm doing. I will hope you will come back and listen, even if it's just for a few minutes a day, to see, here's a different take on this long reigning television show that is quite honestly dominated by a female audience. Even to this day in 2022, that's still the primary audience, but now you're going to hear it from a different perspective, a guy's perspective. I am a husband, I am a father, and you will get kind of my experiences and my thoughts into this show that I absolutely love. So thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you all on the very next episode of the Port Charles Podcast.